Hey guys, what is going on? Valky here, and we just got another dev note from Smilegate, and this one is kind of a doozy, guys. I'm super hyped about this one. So, without further ado, let's start talking about it. This time, we got buffs to Last Rider Krau, Closer Charles, Fire Ken, Fire Lilius, Fire Ilanov, Blue Tywin, and Christy. In terms of artifacts, the ones that buffed are Crown of Glory and Ancient Dragon's Legacy. Now, the initial reaction I have to this is, wow, almost all of these units are knights, and I kind of have a sneaking suspicion I know where this is going, because to me that tells me the 8 Tywin experiments were a success. So now in modern RTA, giving a standard or tank down player one unit, right, one pick that condenses a cleanse option and a mitigation into a singular pick means it can answer both damage and debuffs out in the opener. This is something really, really useful to answering things like Lilius. And maybe even in an earlier era, it'll also answer Peyra, who is both a aggro setup and can also debuff, right? So as such, this patch will see many knights buff to fulfill similar purposes, if I had to guess, and sometimes even for specific matchups. So let's jump into it. Up first is always our ML5 of the batch. We got Last Rider Krau. So now, on top of reducing S3 cooldowns by a turn, every time he gets hit himself, it'll be another additional turn. And that only costs at the cost of one more turn for his S3 cooldown. On the offset, it doesn't look too good, right? Because now it's 7 turns instead of 6 turns. But because now, if he's attacked, it means it can get reduced a lot more. Because whenever he takes an AoE attack, it means his cooldown is getting reduced by 2 turns. Damage now also scales with speed, which is very meaningful in a character that has self-speed buff, and as far as a knight goes, he could be built decently fast. And I do think because he can have his cooldown reduced by 1 every time he's attacked, he's going to have some really fun synergies with all the redirect provokes we have in the game, especially with the buffed version of Fairy Tale Tenebria. And I do think AoE true damage means he's going to be very high tempo, so he might be a knight that's more tuned for standard or even the slightly faster style of aggro, especially for teams that's going to need immunity and a little bit of mitigation. Up next, we got Closer Charles. The only change they gave him was that his S3 can now no longer trigger a counterattack. I think that's all he needed. Usually AoE skills, even for cleave players, is very hazardous for triggering counterattacks. If you trigger one bad counterattack, like for example a Archdemon Shadow, usually, seal into AoE blind, into a little bit of extra damage, into your turn being stolen, and suddenly you're dead, right? Really bad scenario. So now, as long as your first unit can't trigger that, you can use him as an initiator for a bunch of slower single target nukers, right? It's going to make him playable, and I think he's now adjusted to play in 2023. Up next, we have Fire Ken. I'm not super huge on Fire Ken, though I do know a lot of people are a big fan of him. So now he starts with 40 Fighting Spirit, and it just makes it very easy for him to get Fighting Spirit instead of him having to be hit. I'm not a big fan of him having to, kick something for more Fighting Spirit, and then after that, he gets the S3. Although the S3 is incredibly powerful, I'm not a huge fan because he just doesn't seem like a very high tempo unit, right? And that's kind of how I like to play the game. But very high value, probably really good in Guild War in certain matchups, definitely better in Ancient Inheritance and such. So, okay change. Probably, my prediction is slightly more usable in PvP. Okay, this is the one I'm super excited for. Fire Lilius. She was one of my favorite heroes when she was first released, and then kind of fell off hard as units got better and better. Number one thing she's getting is 50% crit chance across all of her attacking skills, which lets her be both a competent utility tank as well as a bruiser. Before, it was hard for her to be either. You had to choose one of those builds, and she was maybe okay or mediocre at one of them. But now, with free 50 crit, she's going to be pretty easily built for both. The big change to Fire Lilius is the fact that her S2 is now going to be a passive. This one is pretty big, as after an enemy uses a non-attack skill, dispels one debuff from the caster and activates her old S2 against said enemy. Suppression can only be activated once every 2 turns. So it's essentially her old skill, but it now automatically activates versus units like, Lilius, Zahak, Peyer, and Lua. Big ones particularly being Lilius and Zahak, because that means now she can cleanse herself and provoke these units so that they cannot finish their 2-part combo with these extra turns. I do think this is kind of what the community was asking for, right? Last patch, we got a lot of those buffs that were like, who asked? This one, we definitely asked for, because now this is going to be able to very consistently break the chain on a lot of these 2-turn setups that relies on non-attack skills the first turn, and then suddenly if these units don't have immunity, boom, you're provoked out. You no longer have your second turn. Pretty excited for this. This is going to be a big tool for a lot of turn 2 players to be able to sneak up on these Lilius, Zahak aggro players like myself. Really happy that this is in the game. Really cool utility that should have definitely been a long time coming, but excited we have that now. Up next, we have Ilanov. I also think this is a long time coming buff. Been asked for a long time. And I'm surprised this wasn't followed up in one of the patch notes last year after Shu and Alencia got buff, right? So now, between these HP bruisers, we have one in every element. She now kind of has this built-in injury set where everything inflicts a bit more injury. And then she also has what looks like Death Dealer race utility, in that based on how much the injury is, she'll do extra fixed damage. Hopefully I'm reading this correctly. Giving her a definitive edge in those HP bruiser slow versus slow mirror matches. But I think most importantly of all, regardless of whether or not she's broken, she looks good enough to be played, which means we finally have a decent fire bruiser with her own win condition in this injury in the slow versus slow mirror match. That's something we've been missing in the game for a long time, right? If you've ever been in a situation where somebody picks, let's say, a Landy or an Alencia in a draft, and you're asking yourself, what can I pick here? Well, Milim has her weaknesses. Carrot also not very safe. Wow, we're Fire Ravi's not very good, and boom, we're out of fire bruisers to pick, and we're actually in a scenario where now we're adding to that pool of fire bruisers, and the game can have much more variety when it comes to playing turn 2 in a RGB rock paper scissors setting. Okay, after that, Blue Tywin. This is also a hero that got reworked. So similar to how Troublemaker Crozet would protect a backline ally from damage, now they've dedicated Blue Tywin to protecting the backline ally from debuffs. So now what happens is, let's say your team eats a Peyra or a Sage Ball S2, right? Tywin will now immediately cleanses them of all their debuffs and then granting them immunity and a barrier for 2 turns. Barrier increases proportional to caster's max HP. I'm gonna go on a limb and say the barrier is probably nothing super crazy, like we shouldn't expect FCC or Eden tier barriers here, mainly due to the fact that I think the intention is more for him to protect versus debuffs, right? As stated earlier, this patch mostly is designed for creating a lot of utility tanks for turn 2 players to kind of creep back into power, save up picks versus turn 1 players. And I think all of these units do a sufficient and competent job at creating these interesting drafts. And Blue Tywin was no exception. Now, his S3 also provides all allies with a 2-turn defense buff on top of defense breaking still for 2 more turns. And I think that's really interesting because just like his ML counterpart, now A Tywin has both cleansing utilities for his own carries as well as being able to defense break to kind of reverse the tempo in a lot of matches. And I think this is really good, right? Because for a long time, immunity was pegged as it's kind of useless. We play with debuffs that will either kill you or do nothing, and if you run immunity where you don't need to, you become a target to Rimuru. And now I think we're in a state of the game where Rimuru is not that strong, and immunity is once again really, really, really good for the game. And having these non-strip units run debuffs kind of put the onus back on a lot of players to think about, hey, we need to have immunity in the draft. Like, how do we set this up, right? And then all of these other knights are kind of here for that. So definitely adds a lot to the draft. And the last hero of the batch is Christy. She got a small rework to her S2 passive, so now instead of having a small chance to counterattack, if she's attacked and she doesn't have a debuff, she will CR push herself and her backline ally. While that's good, I do think it makes it so that she has to build way more F-res, as opposed to before, hey, maybe we just build her mostly as a mitigator with a bit of F-res we can kind of like give out to our unit in the back. Now, I think it's much more important to make sure she stays spotless and completely free of debuffs so that she and her back row ally could just eat the CR push and create a lot of fast cycling combos in a turn 2 setting. And as always, when these 3-star heroes are taking buffs in these patch notes, we have to ask ourselves one really important question. Hey, is this what's going to get a specialty change next? Because if we are, I'm on to you, Smilegate. You know, a knight that's not supposed to eat a debuff ever, has a lot of CR push. If they give her a little bit too many defensive utilities, maybe I feel a little bit scared, because the last time there was a knight that got a specialty change, you know, like SC Arrowell, wow, do we have a lot of tank down meta for days even. Right, we're still in that meta right now. SC Arrowell, best knight in the game. So if they buff Christy in such a way, I'm a little bit scared to see what we might get out of that. Okay, after that, Crown of Glory. Crown of Glory now no longer gives passive defense, but instead reduces damage dealt versus AoE. The 5-soul removal is still there, and the last line of text is their default line of text for damage mitigation. Right, you can only have the strongest effect. I do think now it went from unplayable to being a niche artifact that can be teched in versus a lot of AoE teams, right? You might, like, if you have a Last Rider Krau that you want to play, you might just slap this on him as opposed to like an Aureus if you don't have enough Aureuses, or something similar like that. Either way, I think it's not a crazy artifact, but it does add a little bit of strategic variety to a deeper account, right? An account that has a lot of units maybe, but they don't have like everything built, right? This is going to be something a lot of people can pull out versus a heavy AoE spamming team. And last on the docket is Ancient Dragon's Legacy, Mort's artifact. And, you know, I kind of brainstormed it a little bit. I think this is going to be Fire Lilius's best in slot artifact. One, because crit damage is going to make her really is going to make her hit really hard on the comeback, right? Versus a lot of aggro team. And 2, decrease skill cooldown of all allies by 1 turn, even if it can only be activated 1 time. Makes her really good into Lua, right? One of the biggest problems with Lua is that you don't have a lot of ways to fight back against her, right? Essentially what she does is she forces your entire team to just give up your entire first rotation, right? So you kind of have to play in a really awkward way. And this kind of gets back that agency that your team is going to be losing. Very strong, specifically for this scenario, but I do think Lua is still going to be problematic in times where you know, you draft a very normal team, they're like, I go Lua, and you go, I go Lilius, then they ban your Lilius, and, you know, what do? You're stuck in a 50-50, right? So, it's definitely more of a niche thing, rather than, oh yeah, this is gonna solve all of our problems, you know? But, overall, I do think this patch is super exciting. They pretty much buffed exclusively slow and turn 2 and tank down and bruiser units, as opposed to, you know, a common sentiment that I've been seeing, which is like, hey, you know, the turn 2 and tank down players feel very left out because look at all the new unit releases, right? Ahmed, Eligos, as well as Architect Leica. All of these new units recently have been exclusively aggressive or even cleave units, so they're really hard to play for a lot of people, especially on a setting like RTA, where if you don't have the gear to play cleave, or if you don't have the knowledge, the confidence to play cleave, you're going to have a really hard time there. So, with this wave of buffs, we could definitively say, you know, turn 2 players aren't being left out. Smilegate has not forgotten. And if anything, right, if you guys have considered Smilegate's balancing philosophies, now they like to release heroes slightly underpowered, a little beneath par, if you will, okay? That way, when they buff them later on, you know, they can buff them, they can overbuff them, they can buff them to fit a role, or they can buff them to be meta, right? And I think if you consider it this way, right, the turn 2 players, the tank down players, are actually getting the better deal, because now what it seems like is all of the buff units are turn 2 units, whereas all of the slightly underpowered units are going to the aggro and cleave players. But either way, I'm pretty excited to see how these units change up the meta. I think a lot of these changes were targeted towards really strong and really meta heroes, which I'm happy about, right? I don't think any of them are like Hua Young, where in an attempt to kill a Ravi, you've killed your own game, right? That I think that's a mistake Smilegate won't ever make again, or at least will try not to make. But for now, that's all I got from you guys for today. I'm pretty excited about this patch. Let me know how you guys feel in the comments down below. If you have any questions, you can put it there as well, or you can find me at my stream at twitch.tv/Valky or my Discord. I'm basically there every day. So for now, I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe out there. See ya.